Hi guys, something that's pretty much always forgotten when we discuss negotiations taking place between the UK and say the EU, the US, China, or any other country or bloc around the world is how Westminster will be willing to sacrifice industries that are not important to England but maybe to other parts of the UK. Because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland don't have much of a voice in Westminster and therefore can be ignored. Here Andy Maciver from Holyrood Sources explains what may be trivial for England may be extremely important for Scotland. And unless there are voices for the devolved governments at the table, the UK as a whole will lose out.
I think what is always the case is that the Scottish fishing industry in isolation always loses from negotiations with the EU, and it always has. That's unfortunately because of the fact that economically there are bigger issues at play as far as the government is concerned. As far as this Labour government is concerned, there are bigger issues at play. As far as previous Conservative governments are concerned, there are bigger issues at play, and there are bigger trade winds. And the reality of it, I don't particularly like it, and I'm sure a lot of listeners won't like it either, but the harsh reality of it is that economically, Scottish fishing industry is worth sacrificing. And they do. That's what they do. But this gets back, I think, to what I said earlier on about the setup. This is just too easy for Labour to be pilloried on and for the SNP to score a political victory. I mean, another disaster for Anas Sarwar who gets thrown under the bus by something that Labour does. Why don't we have a situation in the sort of federal structure that was mentioned earlier on? Why don't we have a situation where Angus Robertson, instead of making a speech at Holyrood yesterday about all the things that went wrong and all the UK government phone calls that got cancelled, why is Angus Robertson not in the room? Why is he not part of the negotiating team on behalf of particular Scottish interests? I'd be very comfortable with that. Not just him, but people in Northern Ireland, people in Wales. Why don't we have a pan-UK negotiating team so that interests like the Scottish fishing industry that are particular to one part of the country don't get squeezed, and therefore you don't get this situation where a devolved government is able to come out and score another pretty big political victory in the back of something that the Westminster government has done.
He's completely correct. And what's interesting about this is, as he said here, what it does is it hands a victory to the devolved administration, because they say, look, we've been thrown under a bus. Our fishermen have been thrown under a bus because English fishermen are not important. The fishing communities in England are small. They're a small part of the economy. So of course, Westminster, when it's negotiating with the European Union, is going to sideline fishing, because it's not important. It's not important to Westminster. It's not that important to the English economy. But it is important to Scotland. So why are there people from the Scottish government not in the room? Why are there people from Stormont not in the room? Why are there people from Cardiff not in the room? This is an important question to ask, but we know the answer because Westminster doesn't want them in the room. Westminster wants to negotiate on its terms. It doesn't care about Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Now, when the Tories were in charge, they had very few MPs. Labour have more MPs in Scotland, for example. But at the end of the day, they're going to focus on English industries. They're going to say it's more important that we focus on English industries than Welsh, Scottish or Northern Ireland industries, because there are more people in England. This is an argument, once again, for Scottish independence, because if Scotland was independent, it would have a trade deal with the European Union on a basis of what's good for Scotland, not what's good for Westminster. So I've actually dropped the ball on this because I had been focusing on the defence sector and how important that is. But most of those jobs are in England. They're not in Scotland. And the fishing industry, while it's not that important to Westminster, and I had dismissed it as trivial, it's extremely important to Scotland. Now, there have been some benefits from this deal, but at the end of the day, Westminster is going to focus on England, not on Scotland, not on Wales, and not on Northern Ireland. There's no incentive. This is a legitimate criticism, but it's also, on the other side, there's no incentive for Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland to be considered, because Westminster is made up of primarily English MPs. So there may be some pressure being applied to the Labour government from Scottish MPs to have more of a voice. But at the end of the day, Westminster will focus on what's good for Westminster and not the devolved administrations. Very interesting take here from Holyrood Sources. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.